The first man who heard the whispers was dead within 3 days. Nobody in Holaton, Kentucky, talked about what killed Jacob Mercer. Not in the town square, not in the church, not even in whispered conversations behind closed doors. They just buried what was left of him in a pine box sealed with tar and nails driven deep enough to splinter the wood. The preacher wouldn't say words over the grave. He just made the sign of the cross, spat in the dirt, and walked away so fast his coattails snapped in the November wind. I'm telling you this because what happened in that mine changed everything. Gee, we thought we knew about what lives in the deep places of the earth, and because someone needs to set the record straight before the last person who remembers is gone. My name is Thomas Brennan, and in 1892 I was a mine foreman at the Holaton Coal Company's Operation Number 7. What we found, down there, what we woke up. It wasn't supposed to exist, but it did. And before this is over, you'll understand why some mountains should never be carved open. The whispers started in September. We'd been digging deeper than any mine in eastern Kentucky had gone before. The company wanted coal, and they wanted it fast. The industrial boom was eating up fuel like a starving animal, and every ton we pulled from the mountain meant money, real money. The kind that made men ignore common sense and the warnings carved into trees by the people who lived in these mountains long before we showed up. The Cherokee wouldn't come within 5 miles of Holaton Peak. I learned that from a trader named William Moss who'd lived in the territory for 40 years. He told me the Cherokee called the mountain Sulkaloo's prison, the place where the slant-eyed giant was bound beneath the stone. I seen men said digging there would wake something that had been sleeping since before humans learned to make fire. I didn't believe in Indian superstitions. I believed in coal, wages, and the weight of a good day's work. That belief cost me everything. It was a Tuesday when Jacob Mercer came up from the 7th level at the end of his shift. I was checking the day's output in the weighing station when I heard him talking to himself outside. Not unusual, plenty of miners talk to themselves after 10 hours in the dark. But Jacob wasn't just muttering, he was having a conversation, answering questions, laughing at jokes nobody else could hear. "Jacob," I called out, "you all right?" He turned to look at me, and I'll never forget his eyes. They were wrong. The pupils were too wide, like he'd been staring into pure darkness for so long his eyes couldn't remember how to adjust. And he was smiling. This wide, empty smile that didn't reach those blown-out eyes. "They're so friendly, Thomas," he said. "Once you listen, once you really hear them." "Who's friendly?" "The ones in the stone." He tilted his head like a dog hearing a distant whistle. "They've been alone so long, they just want to talk. They have so much to teach us." I should have pulled him off the roster right then. Should have sent him home, told him to sleep it off. But we were short on experienced miners, and Jacob had a family to feed. So I made a note to watch him and let him go. 3 days later, his wife on him in their root cellar. He'd used a pickaxe to dig through the dirt floor, not digging for anything, just digging down into the earth like he was trying to tunnel back to something. His hands were ground to bone and raw meat, fingernails gone, and he was still scratching at the dirt way. And she found him, still smiling, still listening to something nobody else could hear. The doctor said it was a psychotic break, mining madness. Happens sometimes when men spend too long underground, but when they tried to move Jacob's body to prepare it for burial, his skin came off in sheets like he'd been cooked from the inside, and his bones, his bones were soft, pliable, like they'd started turning into something else. That's when I should have shut down the mine, should have sealed the 7th level and walked away. But I didn't, because 2 days after Jacob died, we hit the biggest coal vein anyone had ever seen. a seam 6 feet thick of pure, beautiful anthracite that ran deeper than our equipment could measure. The company men came down from Pittsburgh, saw the vein, and started talking about expanding operations, about digging 3 new shafts, richest coal operation in the eastern United States. And I thought, Jacob was just one man, one tragedy. We couldn't let his death stop progress. I was wrong about everything. The second miner who heard the whispers was a kid named Danny Polson, 19 years old, married 6 months, with a bay. On the way, good worker, strong back, kept his head down, always volunteered for the deep crews because the pay was better. Danny came to my office one evening in early October. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky the color of a healing bruise. "Mr. Brennan," he said, "I need to talk to you about the sounds." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What sounds? In the new shaft. The deep one we're cutting into that big vein. He was turning his cap in his hands around and around. It's not the mountains settling. It's not equipment. It's talking. Talk. Talk. Ing, I repeated. I know how it sounds. I thought I was going crazy like Jacob, but it's not just me. Half the crew on 7th level hears it. We just don't talk about it because we need the work. He looked at me with desperate eyes. But Mr. Brennan, it's getting louder, and some of the men... Hey, you're starting to answer back. This is the point where I could have changed everything. Where I could have listened to a scared kid and done the right thing. But the company had just given me a raise and a promise of a superintendent position if we met our quotas. My wife was pregnant with our third child. We just bought a house with indoor plumbing. So I told Danny what I'd been telling myself. It was just mountain sounds, echoes in the rock, nothing to worry about. I told him to keep his head down and focus on the work. He tried. He really did. But a week later, Danny didn't come up. With the evening shift, we found him 400 feet into a crawl space that shouldn't have existed. The crew said they'd seen him walk into what they thought was a dead end, a solid rock face at the end of the new tunnel. But when they went to pull him back, the rock face wasn't solid anymore. Air wasn't opening, a crack in the stone just wide enough for a man to squeeze through if he turned sideways and didn't mind the dark. Danny had crawled in. We could see his lamp burning about 20 feet in, and we could hear him talking. Not scared, not calling for help, just talking, like he was having a pleasant conversation with an old friend. "Danny," I shouted into the crack. "Danny, come out of there!" The talking stopped. For a moment there was just silence and the soft hiss of his carbide lamp. Then he laughed. It was a sound I'd heard 1,000 times. Danny had an easy, emphy, trass laugh that could lighten any shift. But this wasn't that laugh. This was something wearing Danny's voice like an ill-fitting coat. "Mr. Brennan," he called back, "you should see this. You should see what they've been trying to show us. Come out of there right now, son. They're beautiful. They've been here so long. Since before the trees, before the sun. They were here when the mountains were just baby hills, and they'll be here when the mountains are dust." His voice was dreamy, almost singing. They want to help us. They want to teach us how to be like them, how to last forever. I ordered 3 men to go in after him. They were halfway through the crack when Danny's lamp went out. What happened in the dark, I can only piece together from what the men told me later. And their stories didn't all match, but they all agreed on the essential facts. The darkness in that crack, K, was absolute, thicker than normal darkness. One man said it felt like the dark had weight, like it was pressing against his eyes. They heard Danny scream, not a scared scream, a scream of pain and surprise. They heard wet sounds, tearing sounds, and they heard Danny's voice still talking, still friendly, even as those other sounds continued. Like his mouth was having one conversation while his body experienced something else entirely. The men ran. I don't blame them. When they emerged, they were white-faced and shaking, and one of them was crying without making a sound. Tears just streaming down his coal-dusted face. We sealed the crack with 8 feet of concrete. We told Danny's wife it was a cave-in, that it had been quick, that he hadn't suffered. We gave her a check for 6 months' wages and helped her move to her sister's place in Virginia. And I told the company we needed to stop digging, that something was wrong with the 7th level, that we needed to bring in geologists, maybe close the mine until we understood what we were dealing with. The company sent Marcus Caldwell. Caldwell was a mine engineer from New York, educated, scientific. He arrived in Holaton, with a trunk full of equipment and an attitude that suggested he thought everyone in Kentucky was an inbred moron who'd been spooked by shadows and superstition. "Mr. Brennan," he said, standing in my office with his expensive suit and his condescending smile, "I've read your reports about the acoustic phenomena on the 7th level. I've reviewed the tragic accidents involving Mr. Mercer and Mr. Polson, and I want to assure you that everything you've described has a rational, scientific explanation." "You weren't there," I said. "No, but I've been in mines from Pennsylvania to West Virginia. I've seen gas pockets create auditory hallucinations. I've seen mineral deposits that reflect sound in unusual ways. I've seen men driven mad by isolation and poor ventilation." He pulled out a leather-bound notebook. "What I haven't seen is anything that couldn't be explained by chemistry, or psychology." "Then explain the crack in the rock. Explain how solid stone opened up. There was likely a pre-existing fissure that your crew's excavation exposed. Perfectly normal. As for your man crawling into it," he shrugged. "Tragic, but I suspect he was already suffering from some form of mining-induced psychosis, perhaps the same condition that affected Mr. Mercer." I wanted to hit him, wanted to grab his starched collar and drag him down to 7th level, push him through that crack and see how scientific he felt when the darkness started pressing against his eyes. But he was the company man, and I was just a foreman who was starting to sound as crazy as the men we'd lost. Caldwell organized an expedition to the 7th level. He brought 5 men with him, all company engineers, all educated, all skeptical. They carried the latest surveying equipment, gas detectors, and enough lamps to turn midnight into noon. I went with them, not because I thought it would help, but because I couldn't let them go down there alone. Whatever was in that mine, it had already taken 2 men. I wasn't going to let ignorance and arrogance feed it anymore. The descent took an hour. The mine's main shaft had been cut in stages, each level connected by a series of slopes and vertical drops that required careful navigation. By the time we reached 7th level, we were nearly 1,000 feet below the surface. The weight of all that stone pressing down made the air feel thick, like breathing through wet wool. The temperature had dropped too. The upper levels stayed around 50 degrees, but down here it was cold enough to see your breath. And there was a smell, faint but persistent, like old iron and something else, something organic and wrong. "Curious," Caldwell said, checking one of his instruments. "The air quality is actually better here than in the upper levels. Higher oxygen content. That contradicts the ventilation models entirely." One of his engineers, a thin man named Peters, was setting up surveying equipment near the entrance to the new shaft, the one that led to the big coal vein and the crack where Danny had disappeared. "Mr. Caldwell, you should see this." We gathered around the transit. Peters had it aimed to the new shaft, measuring the distance to the far wall. "According to this," Peters said slowly, "the shaft extends approximately 300 feet. But according to the excavation reports, your crew only dug 200 feet before hitting the vein." "Check your equipment," Caldwell said. Peters did, 3 times. The measurement didn't change. The shaft was 100 feet longer than it should have been. "Impossible," Caldwell muttered. But I could see doubt creeping into his eyes. The first crack in his certainty. We advanced into the new shaft. Our lamps threw wild shadows across the walls, making the coal seam gleam like wet flesh. And the deeper we went, the more obvious it became that something was deeply wrong with this place. The walls were smooth, too smooth. Coal doesn't naturally form in perfectly smooth surfaces. It's fractured, layered, rough. But these walls looked almost polished, and there were patterns in the stone. Subtle at first, then more obvious. Spirals, geometric shapes, eggs that couldn't be natural but also couldn't have been made by human hands. Some kind of mineral crystallization, Caldwell said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Look at this, one of the engineers said. He was running his hand along the wall, his fingers tracing one of the spiral patterns. This goes deep into the rock. It's not surface level. It's like the pattern goes all the way through. That's when we heard it, the whisper. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even clearly a voice at first. It was more like the suggestion of words, the shape of language without meaning. Hearing someone talk in another room through thick walls, you know they're talking, but you can't make out what they're saying. Every man in that shaft went silent, even Caldwell. The whisper came again, closer this time. And I realized it wasn't coming from ahead of us or behind us. It was coming. From the walls, from the coal itself, from the stone that had been here since before the Cherokee, since before anything human walked these mountains. Equipment malfunction, Caldwell said, but his hand was shaking as he checked his instruments. Some kind of acoustic reflection, or the wisp, resolved into words. Not English. Not any language I'd ever heard. But somehow, impossibly, I understood it. We all did. The meaning bypassed language and went straight into our heads, settling into our thoughts like it had always been there. Welcome home. We're leaving, I said. Now. But Caldwell wasn't moving. None of his engineers were moving. They were all staring at the wall where the whisper seemed strongest, where the spiral patterns were deepest. Did you hear that? Caldwell whispered. Did you understand it? I said we're leaving. But Thomas, he looked at me, and his eyes had that same blown-out look Jacob had worn, that same emptiness. Don't you want to know what they are? Don't you want to understand? I grabbed his arm and pulled. He came reluctantly, like a child being dragged away from a toy. The engineers followed, but they kept looking back, and I knew. We were losing them. We'd made it maybe 50 feet when Peters stopped. Wait, he said. The crack, the one you sealed, it's open again. He was right. The concrete we'd poured was gone. Not broken, not chipped away, just gone. And the crack was wider than before, wide enough to walk through, without turning sideways. And there was light coming from inside. Not lamplight. Not any light that should exist 1,000 feet below the earth. It was a pale, sickly luminescence that made me think of deep-sea creatures and things that lived in caves so deep they'd forgotten what the sun looked like. Fascinating, Caldwell breathed, and he started walking toward it. I tried to stop him. I swear I did. But he was stronger than he looked, and he was driven by something beyond reason. He pulled free and walked into that crack, into that wrong light, and his engineers followed him like dew. Klings following their mother, I was left alone in the shaft with my lamp and my fear. I should have run, should have climbed back to the surface and sealed the entire 7th level, but I could hear them in there, Caldwell and his men, and they were talking to something, having a conversation, and, despite every instinct screaming at me to run, I needed to know what they were talking to. I moved to the crack and peered inside. The space beyond shouldn't have existed. The mountain wasn't hollow. I'd studied the geological surveys. I knew exactly how much solid rock was supposed to be there. But beyond that crack was a cavern, a massive, impossible space that extended in all directions farther than my lamp could reach. And it was full of them. I don't know what to call them. Creatures seems inadequate. Entities is too clinical. They weren't demons or ghosts or any monster from any story I'd ever heard. They were something older, something that had been in the earth before the earth learned how to make the things we call life. They looked almost human if you didn't look directly at them. If you caught them in peripheral vision, they could almost pass for people. Tall, thin, pale. But when you looked straight at them, the illusion fell apart. Their proportions were wrong. Their joints bent in too many places. Their faces had all the right features, eyes, nose, mouth, but arranged in ways that made my brain hurt to process. And they were numerous, dozens of them. Maybe who? Androids, standing in the cavern like a congregation waiting for a sermon. Caldwell and his engineers stood among them, heads tilted in that listening posture I'd seen on Jacob and Danny. And the things were touching them. Long fingers too many. Fingers resting on shoulders, heads, arms, gentle, almost affectionate. One of the things turned to look at me, its eyes, and I use that word loosely, fixed on mine, and I felt something press against my thoughts. Not forceful, not violent, just curious, like a hand gently testing a door to see if it was locked. And I heard it speak directly into my mind without making a sound. You're afraid. You don't have to be. We've been so alone. We just want to share what we know. What are you? I managed to whisper. We are what remains. We were here before your sun ignited. We were here when this world was just cooling rock and poison gas. We have watched species rise and fall like waves on a shore. We have been buried and forgotten and lost to time itself. But we remember everything, and we can teach you to remember too. Teach us what? How to endure, how to persist. Your bodies are so temporary, so fragile. But, hey, don't have to be. We can show you how to become something more lasting, something that won't be erased by time. Caldwell turned to look at me, and his smile was wide and empty and terrifying. Thomas, you have to listen to them. They're offering us immortality, real immortality, not heaven or hell or any religious fantasy. Actual, physical persistence through the ages. At what cost? One of the things moved closer. Its shape seemed to shift as it walked, like it couldn't quite decide what form to hold. Cost is a concept for merchants and children. We offer transformation, evolution. Your flesh is a prison of time and entropy. We can free you from it. I looked at Caldwell, really looked at him. His skin had taken on a waxy quality, like it wasn't quite solid anymore. And underneath, I could see movement. Things shifting beneath the surface like worms in mud. What are you doing to them? I demanded. Preparing them. Human biology is so inefficient, so limited. We're improving it, making it suitable for the long ages. The thing that was speaking tilted its head. You could join them. You could see what we've seen. You could last until the stars burn cold. For a moment, and God help me for this, I was tempted to live forever, to see the future, to transcend the fragile meat and bone that would eventually fail and deposit me in a grave. It was seductive in a way I hadn't expected. But then I looked at Peters, one of Caldwell's engineers, and I saw that his eyes had gone completely black. Not just the pupils, the entire eye, black from edge to edge, and reflecting that sickly light like an oil slick. That broke the spell. No, I said, backing away from the crack. No, you can't have me. The things didn't try to stop me. They just watched with their impasse, eyeball eyes as I stumbled backward, and I heard their voices in my head. Not angry, just disappointed. Such a short life. Such a waste. I ran. Through the shaft, through the 7th level, up the slopes and lifts to the surface. By the time I emerged into the October sunlight, I was sobbing and praying and making deals with God that I knew I couldn't keep. The superintendent found me sitting outside the mine entrance, covered in coal dust and shaking. "Brennan?" What happened? Where's Caldwell and his crew? They're still down there, I said. And they're not coming back. Not as them see. Levs. I told him everything. He didn't believe me. How could he? But he agreed to wait before sending another crew down. We'd give Caldwell and his men until morning to return on their own. They came up 3 days later. All of them. Caldwell, Peters, and the 3 other engineers. They walked. Caldwell, Peters, and the 3 other engineers. They walked. Tea of the mine shaft at dawn on the 3rd day, and they looked fine. Tired, dirty, but fine. Smiling even. Quite an adventure, Caldwell said, signing out at the station like nothing had happened. We found some remarkable geological formations. I'll be filing a full report with the company. What happened down there? I asked him privately. What did those things do to you? He looked at me with perfectly normal eyes, no blown pupils, no black voids, and he smiled. Things, Mr. Brennan, I think the stress of this position is getting to you. We found some unusual rock formations and some acoustic anomalies that I can explain in purely scientific terms. Nothing supernatural, nothing to worry about. But I saw him later, when he thought no one was watching. I saw him standing at the edge of the mine property, staring at the mountain, and his face went slack and empty, and his mouth moved like he was having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. They were still in him, in all of them, waiting. The company kept the mine open. Caldwell's report declared everything safe, explained away the deaths and disappearances as tragic accidents and isolated cases of psychological B. Read down. They expanded operations. 3 new shafts, 50 new miners, and the whispers spread. By November, a quarter of the crew had heard them. By December, men were having full conversations with the walls. By January 1893, the thing that happened had become inevitable. I tried to warn POPOP. E tried to tell the superintendent, the company executives, anyone who would listen. But Caldwell's report had made me look like a superstitious fool, and my warnings were dismissed as the paranoid ramblings of a man who couldn't handle the responsibility of his position. They demoted me, made me a regular crew supervisor, said I needed to recover my equilibrium. So I was there. I was working a normal shift on January 23, 1893, when the 7th level opened up completely. It started with a sound, not a whisper this time, a roar, a deep bass rumble that shook rock and made the support too. Embers groan. The entire mountain was moving, shifting, like something enormous was turning over in its sleep. Then the screaming started. It came from 7th level. Dozens of voices screaming in unison. But they weren't screaming in fear. They were screaming in joy, in ecstasy, like whatever was happening to them was the most wonderful thing they'd ever experienced. Cave in on 7th, someone shouted. All crews evacuate. But it wasn't a cave-in, it was an opening up. The 7th level was supposed to be a series of shafts and tunnels, carefully excavated and supported. But when the rescuers went down against my screaming warnings, they found that the entire level had changed. The tunnels had widened. The caverns had expanded. And everywhere, the walls were covered in those spiral patterns, those geometric designs, glowing with that sickly luminescence. And the men who'd heard the whispers, all 47 of them, they were gone, not dead, not collapsed in a cave-in, just gone, like they'd walked through the walls and kept going. But we found what they'd left behind. In the main chamber of 7th level, they'd built something. I don't know how else to describe it. Asn't a structure exactly. It was more like a sculpture, made from mining equipment, support timbers, rails, and coal, but arranged in patterns that hurt to look at, spirals within spirals, angles that didn't quite work in 3-dimensional space. And in the center of it, there was an opening. A hole lay in reality, not in the rock in reality itself. I could see through it, into that impossible cavern, into that space that shouldn't exist, and I could see them, the things, waiting, watching. Seal it. I told the superintendent, seal the entire level. Seal the whole damn mine. For once, he listened. They brought in demolition crews, set charges throughout 7th level, brought down enough rock to bury the entire operation under 1,000 tons of stone. The explosion was heard 50 miles away. It collapsed the main shaft, crushed the support structures, and supposedly buried everything. Enyang on 7th level, under enough rubble to keep it sealed until the sun burned out. But I know the truth. The company sealed the mine, declared it a total loss, and moved operations 20 miles north. They paid off the families of the lost miners good money, enough to ensure silence. They made sue. No geological survey would ever recommend digging there again. But the mine didn't stay sealed. 3 years later, a hunter found an opening in the mountain. Just a crack in the rock face, barely wide enough to squeeze through. But there was light coming from inside. That same sickly glow. Company sent men to seal it again, but they find another opening within a year, then another. Like the mountain was breathing, opening and closing. The things inside weren't trapped, they were just waiting. And the whispers continued. Locals reported hearing voices in the mountains. Cherokee fam, Eilis who'd lived in the area for generations, moved away, said the land was sick, poisoned. Hunters went missing. Hikers disappeared. In 1897, a surveying crew working 15 miles from the original mine reported finding unusual cave systems that matched no known geological formations. They descry bed spiral patterns in the rock. Spaces that seemed larger than they should be. They sealed those too, but they keep finding more. Because here's what I've come to understand in the 30 years since Holaton mine collapsed. The things in the mountain weren't imprisoned there. They chose to be here. They'd buried themselves in the earth long before humans existed, waiting for something. And we gave it to them. We gave them access to us. Every mine we dig, every tunnel we carve, every hole we blast into the ancient stone were opening doors, creating pathways, and the things that have been in waiting in the deep places, the things that were here before life itself, they're patient. They have all the time in the world. Caldwell disappeared in 1899. Just walked away from his office in Pittsburgh one day and was never seen again. But hikers in the Appalachians sometimes report seeing a tall, thin man wandering the mountains, always heading toward the old mine sites, always listening to something they can't hear. The other engineers vanished too, one by one. Peters was found in 1902 sitting in a cave in West Virginia, covered in those spiral patterns he'd carved into his own skin, with a piece of coal. He was still alive, still smiling, but he wasn't Peters anymore. Not really. The 47 miners who disappeared from 7th level, they're still down there. I know because sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is right, you can hear them singing. Not with human voices. Down with something else. Something that's learned to use human vocal cords for purposes they were never designed for. The company never reopened operations in Holaton. The town itself was abandoned by 1910. Now it's just foundations and memories reclaimed by the forest. But if you go there and ID, bullet and kindet, you can still find the sealed mine entrance. And if you're stupid enough to get close, you'll hear them, the whispers. They're always there, always waiting, always offering the same thing: knowledge, immortality, transformation, freedom from the prison of flesh and time. And her. Ease the terrible truth I've learned. They're not lying. I saw what they could do. Saw men transformed into something that could survive in the deep earth, in the crushing pressure and absolute darkness. Saw them become part of something ancient and vast and incomprehensible. The things in the mound, Tain aren't evil. That's too human a concept. They're alien in the truest sense, so foreign to our understanding that trying to judge them by our morality is meaningless. They don't hate us. They don't want to hurt us. They want to improve us, to save us from the tragedy of our brief, burning lives. But the price is everything that makes us human. I'm 87 years old now. I've spent most of my life trying to warn people, trying to make sure no one else opens those doors. But the world is hungry for coal, for minerals, for the riches buried in the earth. And every year, we dig deeper. Every year, we get closer to them. There are more Holotowns out there, more mines where the whispers have started. I hear about them from the men who write to me, who've heard the stories and recognized the signs. West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, all through the Appalachians, all through the Appalachians. The old mountains that were here before the dinosaurs. The Cherokee were right. There are things imprisoned in the mountains. But the prisons are failing. The doors are opening. And the things inside are patient. They've been waiting for millions of years. They can wait a little longer. But they don't have to wait much longer, because we can't stop digging. It's in our nature. We're driven to tear open the earth, to expose its secrets, to pull wealth from the deep places, and every time we do, every time we blast a new tunnel or sink a new shaft, we're knocking on their door. Eventually. Hey, you're going to answer. I think about Jacob Mercer sometimes, about the smile on his face as he dug through his root cellar floor, trying to get back to them. About Danny Polson, having a friendly conversation even as something in the dark pulled him apart and put him back together wrong. Were the why in pain? Did they understand what was happening to them? Or had the transformation already started, rewriting their thoughts, changing their desires, making them want what was being done to them? I don't know. I never asked. I was too busy being afraid. But here's what keeps me up at night. What if they were happy? What if, in those final moments, they'd found something that made all of human experience seem pale and limited? What if the things in the mountain really were offering a kind of salvation, and we're just too scared and too small to accept it? I had a dream last week. I was back, in the mine, standing at that crack in the rock, looking into the impossible cavern beyond. And the things were there, waiting, and they spoke to me the way they spoke to Jacob and Danny and all the others. It's not too late, they said. You can still join us. You can still be part of something that lasts. And I wanted to. God help me. I wanted to walk through that crack and let them change me. Because I'm old and I'm tired and I'm afraid of the darkness that's coming for me. The final darkness that claims everyone. But I didn't. Because I remember what we are, what humans are. We're brief, we're fragile. We burn bright and fast, and then we're gone. And maybe that's tragic. Maybe it's a flaw in our design, but it's also what makes us beautiful. Our mortality gives meaning to our choices. Our limitations force us to create, to love, to matter in the short time we have. The things in the mountain don't understand that. They've lasted so long that they've forgotten what it means to be temporary. They see our short lives as a problem to be solved, not a condition to be embraced. And that's why we can't let them out. Not because they're evil, but because they would save us from our humanity. So I'm telling this story, putting it on record before I'm gone. Not because I think it will stop anything. The wheels are already in motion, the doors are already opening, but because people need to know what's waiting in the deep places. They need to know that when the miners start hearing whispers, when they start having conversations with the walls, when they start smiling that empty smile and talking about the friends they've made in the stone, it's already too late. The transformation has begun. And once it starts, it never stops. The Holaton mine is still there. Eyed under tons of rubble and decades of forest growth. But the earth around it is sick. Trees won't grow right. Animals avoid it. And on certain nights, you can see lights moving beneath the ground. That sickly glow pulsing like a heartbeat. They're still down there, still waiting, still whispering. And eventually, someone will listen. Someone always does. The real horror isn't what happened in 1892. It's what's still happening. Right now, in mines across Appalachia, men are hearing whispers, making friends in the dark. learning secrets that were never meant for human minds. And one day, maybe soon, maybe in 100 years, enough people will listen. Enough doors will open, and the things that have been sleeping in the mountains since before the world was green will finally come home. Not to conquer us, not to destroy us, to save us. And that might be worse, because I've seen what salvation looks like in their hands, and it's a transformation so complete that the thing that emerges on the other side isn't human anymore. It's not anything we have words for. It's just other, and it lasts forever. So when you hear about mine disasters in the Appalachians, when you read about crews that disappeared or miners who went mad, when you see the news reports about unexplained sounds in abandoned shafts, remember that story. Remember that some mountains should never be opened. Remember that some whispers should never be answered. Remember that there are worse things than dying. There's living forever as something you don't recognize in the mirror. The Cherokee knew this. That's why they stayed away from Sulkalu's prison. That's why they carved warnings into the trees and told stories to scare their children away from the deep places. But we didn't listen. We thought we knew better, and now we're paying the price. I'll be dead soon. My heart is failing, my body is breaking down, and I welcome it, because death means I won't become what Jacob became, what Danny became, what Caldwell and his engineers became. Death means I get to stay human until the end. But I worry about what comes after. Not heaven or hell. I stopped believing in those after Holaton. I worry about whether death is really the end, or if the things in the mountain have learned to reach beyond it. If they're waiting for me in whatever comes next, ready to offer their gift one more time. I hope not. I hope death is just darkness and peace and an end to consciousness. But I don't know, and that uncertainty is its own kind of horror. All I can do is warn you, stay out of the old mines, don't dig too deep, and if you ever hear whispers in the stone, run. Run fast and don't look back, and don't listen to what they're saying, no matter how reasonable it sounds, no matter how much sense it makes, because they're very good at making you want what they're offering. And once you want it, you're already lost. The last thing I'll say is this. The Appalachian Mountains are older than the Rockies, older than the Himalayas. They were tall when dinosaurs walked the earth, and they've been worn down by hundreds of millions of years of wind and rain. But they're still here, still standing, still full of secrets. And in the deep places, in the darkness beneath the stone, things are waiting. Things that were here before us. Things that will be here after us. Things that want to make sure we're here after us too. That's what crawled out of Holaton Mine in 1892. Not monsters, not demons, just patient, ancient things offering immortality to creatures too frail and brief to understand the price. And they're still out there, still whispering, still waiting for the next person to listen. Don't be that person. Please, don't be that person.